Peace. Welcome to Faith Expressions. In the 10th Sunday of Ordinary Time, we have the 3rd chapter of Genesis in the first reading and the 3rd chapter of St. Mark in the Gospel. The narrative of the first reading, the 3rd chapter of Genesis, that part there wherein Adam and Eve disobeyed God. And then the good news after the narrative, at the end of the narrative, is what we call proto-evangelion, or this is a good news of the coming of the Messiah. However, the idea here is the disobedience, the fall of humanity, the sin of humanity, through disobedience, through not doing the will of God. When we come to the Gospel, the 3rd chapter of St. Mark, this is about doing the will of God. The mother of Jesus and his cousins, his relatives, were there wanting to see him. But then Jesus said, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers and my sisters?" My mother and my brothers and sisters are those who does the will of God. And so, what is this to us? Time and time again, we are being reminded of the very fundamental truth of our Christian existence, which is connection to God. Our connection to God is not just about idea. Okay, I believe in God, but it is about action, doing the will of God. And so when we believe, we also have to connect it with we behave. And the concretization of believing in God is doing the will of God. Now, the doing of the will of God action comes from listening. We listen to the Word of God. We listen to the will of God. We listen to the designs of God. In the first reading, Adam and Eve knew beforehand that they were told by God not to eat of the fruits of the forbidden tree. But they disobeyed because they didn't listen. That is why the point in the narrative of the first reading is that Adam and Eve knew the will of God. Adam and Eve knew the word of God given to them, but they didn't listen. They didn't translate the word of God into action. In the gospel, we are being reminded again of the doing of the will of God. So, where is really the disconnect? We know the will of God, and yet we seem to not be able to do it. Sometimes, or many times. We listen to the word of God, the words and teachings of Jesus Christ, but we seem not to translate the word into action. Where is really the disconnect? The disconnect is in the willingness, the decision, in the intention, in the commitment. I am here in our clergy library, and behind me is the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And the Blessed Mother Mary is the living example for us of a person who did the will of God. And that is why when Jesus said, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers and sisters?" My mother, my brothers and sisters are the one who does the will of my Father. Blessed Mother Mary did it for us. In this Sunday, 10th Sunday Ordinary Time, let us renew our commitment to do the will of God. Reminder, the disconnect between our knowing of the will of God and the translation into action is in the willingness, in the intention, in the commitment, in the conviction of doing it. Our heart must be inclined to do the will of God, must be able to will the will of God, must be able to decide to translate God's words into action. it is many times difficult because our intentions, our mentality, our inclinations and mannerisms many times would just want to be comfortable, would just want to do what we want and more pleasing to us. Many times we cannot pray because we see prayer as an imposition. We do not want to do it. Many times it is a burden to go to the church, for example, during holidays of obligation, days of obligation, or Sundays, because we think it is an imposition. We think that it is not actually coming integrally from believing and from loving God. Try to think of this in your life. Is there willingness in your Christian life? Is there commitment in your being a follower of Jesus Christ, in your being a child, son or daughter of God the Father? When we can realize this, then indeed Christianity will not just be an idea, but action and life. May we be able to truly be accepted among those whom Jesus will say, they are the one who does the will of God the Father.